think if we're, well, we got Mary Ann still coming, so.
Oh, shoot, where's this thing? Okay, no.
What do you want?
So you just, if it's on the pressure.
All right, Lisa, you ready?
Close that out, and we can run it from there.
All right, so welcome everyone to the final meeting of 2019. It's been a busy year, and we have already started our meeting. We just came out of executive session, and I think we're now going to swear in our newest commission member.
Yay!
All right. It's always fun. Come on up, Amy. All right. So, okay. This is one of those you repeat after me.
Okay.
If you want to raise a hand.
Raise a hand.
Okay, yeah. So, I solemnly affirm
I solemnly affirm
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
and will obey the laws of the United States
and will obey the laws of the United States
and the state of Ohio,
and the state of Ohio,
that I will in all respects
that I will in all respects
observe the provisions of the Charter
observe the provisions of the Charter
and ordinances of the Village of Yellow Springs,
and ordinances of the Village of Yellow Springs,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of
and will faithfully discharge the duties of
the office of
the office of
the Arts.
Arts
and
Commission.
Culture
Culture Commission.
All right, great. Okay.
What am I doing here?
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Welcome
you.
aboard. All right. Okay. Yes. Okay, so next up we have any announcements?
Get them together.
No announcements?
No, there's something. It's not working. Actually, I'm trying to find one.
Since we got Chief Carlson here, Chief, you want to tell us a little bit about New Year's Eve?
Absolutely. Good evening. Brian
Good evening.
Carlson, Yellow Springs Police Department. We will mimic last year with the exception of Short Street and CNN being on scene. So it will be business as usual. The event will be hosted by Miami Township Fire and Rescue once again. We'll have Colin, his department, in conjunction with Johnny and Public Works, utilizing our largest vehicles for security and safety. We'll have 2 officers in uniform on duty and 4 of the PD in the crowd. And we will be there, to put it in John Grody's terms, armed with garbage bags. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chief.
And I do have something for you.
Yes.
So the Antioch College Kitchens invites the greater community to Birch Kitchen Dining Room for a taste of the college's farm-to-table program. You're being asked to come in and share the college's harvest and see how they eat at Antioch College at a community dinner on Tuesday, that's tomorrow, December 17th, and Wednesday, December 18th. Cocktails and hors d'oeuvres start at 6 p.m. and dinner is at 7 p.m. both days. Tuesday's dinner features a choice of beef or vegetable bourguignon. Wednesday's dinner features herb roasted chicken or lentil crusted tofu. More information and menus and registration can be found at Antioch College's website. So come and eat. And if you can't remember that, just go to Antioch at 6 o'clock, both Tuesday and Wednesday nights, to Birch Kitchen, and just wave your hands and someone will put some food in front of you. All right.
Okay, I have a few things I want to mention. So first of all, and I know I forwarded this to Denise, and I don't know if it got around, but Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission is doing a survey that closes off on Wednesday to get feedback about their planning tools. So I mentioned to Denise that, that Aaron should probably know about this and maybe he has some ideas. But yeah, it's mvrpc.org/planning tools is the survey. So we applied for the Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Prize again. That was in our packet. We made it to phase 2. Yay.
Okay.
Sean? get to make another video. Yay, all right. So phase two's due, I think, like January 20th. So we're gonna be getting that together soon. So, yeah, and Lisa, if you have time,
Yep,
love to have you involved.
yep.
Okay. Oh. Well, I think that's all I've got.
I have a little one. It's kind of a crossover to the schools, to Yellow Spring schools. Last Tuesday, the 10th, there was a community meeting about the school facilities, and I wanted to highlight that since we're all one community here. I thought it was really interesting. It was the most recent update of the facilities work group, and the new materials are posted on the ysschools.org website if people want to take a look at the latest findings related to the facilities. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, well, otherwise, happy holidays to everyone. And we are back again. What's our first meeting next year?
January 6th?
January 6th. All right. So, yeah, we won't be pausing for too long. Okay, we have the consent agenda, which is the minutes from our last meeting, December 2nd. And can I get a motion to approve?
I move we approve.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Oh,
I have one correction.
yes.
I noticed that, little notes here, on the motion to exit executive session, it said Sanford seconded, but I was absent.
That's powerful.
I know. It was I wasn't feeling well. It was my ghost. My spirit left my body and seconded that. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, executive session, I got you, I found it. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
So who really did it?
It must have been Stokes because KS.
KS.
Okay.
I'll go with that. I
So-
was gonna say, you shut off the lights and we look similar.
Oh, come on.
All right, so a motion to amend, or to, for the consent agenda with the minutes as amended.
I move that we amend the minutes as spoken.
Seconded.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 So it sounds like we still need to pass the consent agenda. So can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
And I second.
Okay, all those
Kevin
in
seconds.
favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, awesome. Review of the agenda. Anything we need to add, change?
I have a nomination to make for Environmental Commission.
Okay. Anything else?
There's a petition from Cresco that's listed in petitions and communication that I would like to recommend in action. So maybe that's a new business or?
Yep, new business. And then
And where do we put the nomination? Is that new
That'll-
business too?
we typically put it with the commission reports,
Oh,
since
okay.
we're the second meeting.
Okay.
All right, and then what about, I guess it's not in the packet, but what about the request from the widow?
I'm sorry I didn't close the loop on you, but it requires an additional conversation.
Okay. Cool. All right, so in that case, nothing else on the agenda. Marianne, would you like to review petitions and communications?
Yes. We had four that were listed here, anyway. We got a letter thanking, was it actually addressed to you, Brian, our support of climate change legislation from Sherrod Brown, with a lot of information about how important this is and how there are opportunities in Ohio.
That was a good letter.
There was a letter from Ursa Northstar, which was in general about traffic concerns, especially on Xenia Avenue and speeding vehicles. In particular, though, she highlighted being knocked by a truck while she was on her bike into a parked car, which I'm sure was not fun, and she had some suggestions. Sheila Dunphy had a letter which I think must have been late because it seemed really to be mostly addressing the temporary traffic change. She talked about that at length, her concern about school drop-off, especially by out-of-town parents, and issues about walking and biking. Then the letter from Cresco was also in that packet. We're going to take care of that. And there were also the mayor's report and planning and zoning report. I'm not sure if they would be in communications, but
They're behind the manager's report.
yes, they were. But sometimes they're included in communications. That's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move into legislation, and first up, we have ordinance 2019-44. Judy, I think we can read that by title only at this point.
Certainly. This is authorizing and directing the submission to a vote of the electors of the Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio, a proposal to amend certain provisions of the Charter of the Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio, to be voted upon at the next regular municipal election on March 17th, 2020, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
All right. So I'll begin the conversation just by review. This is the resolution that we need, or the ordinance that we need to pass tonight, if we want to have what we've decided are 3 separate issues related to proposed charter amendments. So we have the charter amendment. Actually, Judy, let's read those out loud at least. So why don't you read the first one, and then I'll just say a few words about each one.
All right, so this is the first amendment to Section 6, which would be, residents who are 16 years of age and older are eligible to vote for Yellow Springs local elected officials and issues pursuant to the home rule power and granted by this charter.
Okay. So basically, this is the separated issue that 16 and 17-year-olds would be allowed to vote in local elections. That means Village of Yellow Springs only. So that does include council members, the mayor, and any other initiatives that would be only voted on by Yellow Springers. Okay, and then the second one?
Brian?
Yes.
I think it's just important to add that they will not vote on school-related issues.
Yes, right, because the school district is outside of Yellow Springs, so not on township, not on county, only on village specific. Okay.
Yes. And Exhibit B, this is the second amendment to Section 6. Residents of the Village of Yellow Springs who are non-U.S. citizens shall be electors and are eligible to vote for Yellow Springs local elected officials and issues pursuant to the home rule power and granted by this charter.
Okay. So this is the other parsed out issue, which basically extends voting privileges, again, for local issues only. That's all we can control with our charter. So being a resident, we have a definition for that, which basically says if you've lived in the village for 30 days, so you have a local residence, then you are a resident. With both of these amendments, as with the third one, you have the opportunity to vote yes or no. Okay, if they both pass, then we extend voting privileges to both groups, but it may be possible that only one of them or neither of them pass. Okay, and the last one?
And the last one, I have corrected it, though there is not a no option shown here, but it will be there, let me assure you. This section is the change to Section 29, Mayor, and it says the mayor should meet the same qualifications as a member of council and should be nominated and elected for a term of 4 years, commencing with the November 2021 general election.
Okay. And so this is the amendment that is suggesting that a 4-year term is more appropriate because, as many know, a 2-year term, it takes a lot of time to get up to speed. And certainly the mayor's court does have some particular learning curve to get over related to the various ordinances and whatnot. But again, this is about, Lisa, maybe you want to say anything more about why you brought this forward?
I brought it forward just because of my experience as a council person elected to 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, and in light of the complexities of the mayor's court.
Yes. Okay. So I think we can take some comments. Mitzi?
Well, I just thought about this. My name's Mitzi Miller. What happens if something happens to the mayor and you have to bring in somebody else to cover for a medical reason or something like that, what happens then with that 4 years?
I can cover that actually if you want. If you
Well,
like. It's covered in the charter. Actually, a member of council can step in as an acting mayor, and then can hold that position until the next election.
So it could be like 3 years, or it would be.
Yeah, and because that is extended, perhaps it would be something to look at for the next charter change, that there be, some caveat that, as to how long a council person holds the role before there's another special election held, or something of that nature, so. But my thinking is that it goes to the next election period, whether or not that 4-year term is up. For example, when Judith Hempling stepped down, Canada Sanford stepped in, but the caveat was you don't get to fulfill the entirety of her term only until the next election. So I'm thinking it's the same way for mayor.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Laura?
I never really understood this effort on the last part, on the mayor, because as Lisa said, if a 2-year term is too short for a council member, then why do we have a 2-year term, to which I myself have been elected? And I mean, as an attorney, I feel like the job of mayor, even though it might be overwhelming for some people, hopefully if you run for it, you probably feel like you can learn it. And I feel like 2 years is long enough to learn what they need to learn to be mayor for the limited number of ordinances they see. I actually think the job of council is bigger than that because of all the departments and all the levels of regulation and so forth. I feel like also in general, 2-year terms are more responsive to the people. So if people like somebody, think they're doing a good job, there is no term limit, so they can elect them for the next 20 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. So I feel like it's unnecessary. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, well, I think that's, the most important thing is that everyone will get a weigh in on all these issues, and that will happen in March, if we pass this ordinance. Any questions or comments from council members? Okay. Yes.
What if both pass? Is that an issue?
I can get you there too. I know one of the reasons that you're bringing
Do
it
you want to
up
repeat
is.
the question?
Okay, the question is what happens if both of I'm assuming changes to section 6 pass. We had wangled with that before because the solicitor had indicated you can't give an either or, you can't give 2 options for one section. So the way that it's written is not an either or, it is an and an and. So it is 2 separate amendments to that section, neither of which necessarily affects the other. If you pass them both, obviously the fact that you can vote at the age of 16 will affect the non-citizen issue and vice versa, but they can each stand alone. So they're not an either or scenario, and we talked it all around Robin Hood's barn, and I finally did get the blessing from the solicitor that he was convinced that they were not asking the electorate to choose an either or, but were giving 2 separate options, of which you could choose both.
Okay. So actually, since this is a ordinance and we're reading it as an emergency, I do want to open the public hearing. So are there any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Mitzi?
No, just for the ordinance.
Yeah. Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and Judy, if you could call the roll, please.
Yes, Sanford.
Yes.
Stokes.
Yes.
Krieger.
Yes.
McQueen.
Yes.
Housh.
Yes. All right. So the next thing we'll have to do is convince the board again that it should go on the ballot, and see how that goes. Should go well. All right, so next up we have ordinance 2019-45, also reading as an emergency. Judy, title only?
Yes, this is 2019 fourth quarter supplemental appropriations and declaring an emergency, Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
All right. Colleen?
Okay, I'll have to move this down just a little bit. Fourth quarter In order for our end of the year, I have a request in for the supplemental on our budget, and there's just a few items. The Parks and Recreation Fund, I'm asking for a $10,000 supplemental increase for wages. That's under the Personnel Services. We had budgeted $59,200 in the parks. The pool is fine, and the Bryan Center, we budgeted $134,800, and I'd like $5,000 extra for those two to complete my payroll. Then I have a request in for the Water Capital Fund. This is a booking entry. It's $4,038. It's a payment made to Shook Construction on our water department loan, so it'll be a money in, money out. And the final one is under the solid waste. The solid waste is short $45,000 on the estimate that we put in for the budget to pay the Rumpke bill. And it's the same issue that I brought at the third quarter, where the first 2 months of this calendar year was paying last year because it was short. So I'm trying to get these cleaned up so they'll fall in the correct year. So that comes to a total on the fourth quarter supplemental request of $59,038.
Okay, any questions from council? All right, thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.
I'm going to open the public hearing, and do you have any questions or comments from citizens? All right, we'll close the public hearing, and Judy, if we could call the roll?
Yes. Stokes?
Yes.
McQueen?
Yes.
Krieger?
Yes.
Sanford?
Yes.
Housh?
Yes. All right. Resolution 2018-54. Judy, let's go ahead and read that in full.
All right. This is adjusting the village employee wage scales. Whereas Yellow Springs Village Council amended Section 252.05 of the codified ordinances with the passage of Ordinance 2010-26, which established a new methodology for the adjustment of employee wages. And whereas the village manager has used this methodology and has recommended that the village employee wage scales be adjusted by 2.25% effective as of, and that should read the first payroll period in 2020. And whereas village council concurs with this recommendation, now therefore council for the village of Yellow Springs, Ohio hereby resolves that, Section 1, the village employee wage scales be adjusted by 2.25%. Section 2, this increases to be effective as of the first payroll period in 2020. Section 3, this increase will not be applied to the salary of the village manager, clerk of council, village treasurer, or village solicitor. Section 4, this resolution shall be in effect in full force upon its adoption.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
All right, Josue?
Thank you, Brian. In accordance to 252.05 annual employee wage increases, I hereby recommend the approval of adjusting village employee wage scales by 2.25%. This recommendation is being done in consideration as required by the ordinance of annual increases given by other Greene County public employers, the CPIU for the Midwest region, and the village's current economic conditions. The surrounding Greene County public employers are providing annual increases ranging from 2.0% to 4.0%, with the majority providing increases of 2.25% to 2.5%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released latest estimates on the CPIU for a region on December 11th. The changes in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, the CPIU, Midwest region reflects an increase of 1.9 over a 12-month period. Item number 3, the village's current economic condition is financially healthy and allows for this annual adjustment. On this last item, if you recall, the budget was approved with a potential salary increase of 3.5%. This is well below that budget approved allowance for salary. I've also included the CPIU report in your packet. Also included is a report on wages by county and Ohio. So you'll see how Greene County compares to the rest of the counties in Ohio. Greene County overall, as county employees, pay better than a lot of other counties, but we also have certain circumstances that other counties like Clark County, we're in a different financial position than some of those counties. Any questions?
Any questions from council?
No?
I appreciated having all that information about the different counties. That was helpful to have that in the packet. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, I'll say, it's traditionally, we have had a cost of living adjustment annually. It's something that all the other municipalities in Greene County, I know, do. And I think we've also been conservative about that increase and kept it around 2, in this case, 2.25%. So I certainly support it. Life is expensive. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, if not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thanks to our village team.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, and we've got one more resolution, 2019-55. I think we can read that by title only.
All right, this is authorizing the village manager to enter into a lease with Stony Creek Garden Center for village-owned property located at 4550 US 68 North.
Can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
All right, Josue, are you talking about this one?
Yes. The Stony Creek has expressed an interest in renewing its lease over at the Stony Creek Garden Center, which is right outside of town. And so we're proposing to renew the lease for a 3-year term with a 5% escalator. Why the 5% escalator? This is a policy we enacted for the pottery lease. So in looking to make adjustments for other properties that we're leasing out to third parties, it will be a fair policy to also apply to this property. So they're currently paying $750, and that increases by 5% every year.
How much do we pay in property taxes for that? It's something like 8 acres or something?
Yes, it's 8.24 acres, and the taxes come out to a little over $1,000
Annually?
annually.
Okay. Okay.
The per acre cost comes out to about $1,000. So when you multiply the 750 times 12, they're right a little over $8,000, close to $9,000. So I can get you the exact figures.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we want to balance, covering our costs with encouraging commerce, so, yeah, I think it looks good to me.
Correct. So the rate does allows us to recover the property tax cost, and so.
I'm sorry, did you say that the taxes are $1,000 an acre approximately, or
No.
$1,000 for this whole property?
For the whole property.
Okay.
I can, I actually have pulled it up, so I can get you the exact figure.
I just realized I wasn't clear about that.
Okay, anything else? Questions, comments? Yeah, Stony Creek's a great business. They've done a lot to clean that area up, and I hope people try to get out there to support them. They've got some great plans. Questions or comments from citizens? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Legislation is done.
All right. Mary Ann and Brian, I have that figure is $1,068.10 is the property tax
Okay.
for that property.
And what is that zone, not zone, but what is is it considered like farmland or?
It
not?
is classified as agricultural, so that's the rate that's being applied for the property.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, wow. So we have our first report from our new treasurer. And Judy, I think you've got the mic.
All right, I will launch. Currently, we have under active investment $7,277,265. This amount represents an increase of $907,128 since the end of 2018, and of $3,502,798 since the end of 2017. Earnings from investments through November of 2019 were $157,127. This amount represents an increase from $95,670 in 2018 and $34,409 in 2017. In November of 2019, the village hired an investment consultant, Brad Drager of Bond Tech Incorporated, to advise the investment committee regarding options open to us as a government entity. Prior to this time, a consultant had been deemed unnecessary since Star Ohio and Star Plus returns were consistently outpacing both CDs and commercial paper. As the yield curve began to invert in early 2019, forecasters predicted a slowdown for Star Ohio and Star Plus. Those predictions have held true over the course of the year, and the downward trend is expected to continue for the foreseeable future. We've noticed the decline in the month-to-month yield performance of our portfolio from April of 2019, when it was 2.55%, to November of 2019, where it is at 1.9%. And I included charts in your packet that give you that information. This trend makes having a professional investor's predictive ability and advice valuable at this time. As the consultant begins to guide investment potentially in different directions, of course within state-required guidelines and in keeping with council directives, I will include that information in the quarterly report. And, I think I left out that, because I've got the old report. Yep. You've got the old report too.
Oh.
So what I had added was that Brad Drager will also be providing a quarterly report about those investments, and he, in fact, has done so. And when I'm done, I'll have Josue jump into that one. That was also included in your packet. The village manager and finance director, as reported a month ago, have now put in motion a transfer of village liquid assets from U.S. Bank to Westbanco. This move will result in lowered banking costs to the village and in greater flexibility in our ability to invest cash assets in lower interest investments, which can be readily liquidated. Once we're online with Westbanco, I'll provide a quarterly report indicating the return on those lower interest, high liquidity assets, separated from the higher yield investments that we'll make through Bond Tech.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Good job.
Included in your packet, you'll see a breakout year by year on how much money we've put in investment accounts at Star Ohio and Star Plus. So you'll see those total in those packets. And the takeaway from the presentation that's included from Bond Tech are a few things. On your first pages, you'll see the performance of the Star Ohio and Star Plus daily rates. So as Judy mentioned, we are now at 1.9% in yield, and we see that decreasing over time, or showing a lower performance. In fact, on November 25th of 2019, the rate for Star Ohio dropped to 1.84%, and for rate over 2.5 million was at 1.45. So we're seeing that decline. Also included in the report from our investor, Bond Tech, they are U.S. recession risk indicators. On this chart, the analysts attempt to look at key indicators, key financial indicators to predict a recession or a slowdown. This information is useful to us as we think about what type of investments to make and what time horizon. So do we want to make investments for 12 months, 24 months, or 36 months? These key performance indicators help influence that decision. So this information is being included as reference, and we want the entire council to be informed as to what kind of conversations we're having with our investors. So we're looking not just performance now, but in the foreseeable future, making the informed decisions about what may be ahead of us. Also in the recession risk indicators are the current risk indicator, performance indicators that we're looking at. We're also comparing that to the last recessions. The indicators are measured against 7 recessions that have taken in the past. So in terms of comparing that, it looks like we're not actively entering a recession compared to those other 7 recessions, yes. But it's something that we should keep an eye on. I think it's an opportunity for us to make sound investments now to ensure that our portfolio is yielding the performance that we have seen over the last 2 years or better. We're counting on those revenues and want to ensure that they're available to us in the foreseeable future. And how to do that is by staying informed to what the market is doing, what investment securities are available to us within our investment guidelines that are set by council and by the state.
And the 159 or wherever we're at this year is up through when?
The 190?
Was that?
The
are we at
1.9?
No, the amount on our return this year.
So the 157 is our interest investment return. This is
Yeah,
interest
that's
that
what
we're
I'm talking
making
about.
on
So
the
that's through when?
7.2. This is through November 30th. So we still
Okay.
have a month left of performance
Okay.
for the year. And that will be reported at the end of year financial, so in January.
Okay. All right.
I'd like to invite the council to join me in acknowledging the work that Colleen has done since she's joined our team, because, I'm thrilled to see this increase in our earnings. It's real money, and I'm thrilled. That is not only, though, because of the interest rates that those different instruments are collecting. It's because Colleen has been able to do an analysis of the amount of operating money we need in the bank month after month, so that we keep our accounts better sized, and it frees up money in a very liquid way for us to invest. And that would not be possible without the work that Colleen has done since she joined us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen.
Duly noted.
All right. And thank you also for taking a little bit of the leap of faith with us. And yes. So I know it's not always easy for the finance person to budge, but it's been a good relationship.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Questions or comments from citizens? Okay. So now we are at the time when, Mitzi, you can talk about anything, as long as it's not already on the agenda. So this is citizen concerns. We ask, actually, we require that you limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we are strict about that moving forward. And so Mitzi, please come up.
Thank you. My name's Mitzi Miller. I have a concern about Ms. McQueen's comment in the paper about issues on parking with Home Inc.'s development. She noted that some towns are doing away with minimal parking requirements entirely. We have more parking than we needed, she stated, and businesses and residents should be able to determine how many parking spaces they need. I believe our neighbors and neighborhoods need some protection when it comes to density and parking. I respect having zoning ordinances that address this. I'm for adequate parking for the use, off-street as much as possible. We've already seen changes made to accommodate small lots, homes, rentals, parking, and minimal front yards that have been now turned into parking lots. I want our council members to remember to be looking out for the interest of all residents in our village and how it impacts them and their neighborhoods. I hope this isn't a direction you'll consider and follow the zoning ordinance in the future already in place. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitzi. Any other citizen concerns? All right. Then we're moving into old business. Okay, and first up, Lisa is going to talk about the Ad Hoc Review Committee.
Yeah, so in the packet is the actual report that came from the participants to the village manager. And I'm not going to comment on that report, although Josue may want to, and I would invite Chief Carlson as well, if he's interested in commenting both on the report. What I'd like to talk just a little bit about is the debrief that the participants participated in. Because this is the first time that we convened this group. We were convened by the village manager to act. We were pulled together ad hoc as an independent body to review the facts of an incident. And the notion here was this was an alternative to the typical project, which would have been to engage an external entity, but instead to involve community members. And so you'll see that the document in the packet, people responded to what were the strengths and benefits of the process, what were the challenges and weaknesses, did the process have a positive value, did it present any negatives, and overall, is this something that the participants would recommend as an option going forward? I would say that the overall perspectives were positive. The biggest challenge was really the time constraint, to have a group of very busy community members find time on their calendar that worked for everybody, particularly this time of year was a challenge, and it took a lot of time because it was complicated and we cared a lot, and we wanted to give all the people who participated time to tell their stories. So I would say it took us 3 or 4 times longer than what we had originally imagined. But on the upside, everyone who participated really felt like we had a diverse set of citizens, that the process was able to be as transparent as possible, that everybody was very respectful of one another. And we hope that the community members appreciate the involvement and not just, of having people from the community volunteer their time to get involved. We were challenged because on one hand, we wanted to be as transparent as possible, but also at the same time, be sensitive to confidentiality. And also to think about the conflict of interests that different people might have coming into it. And so while this could be a very useful tool, the group suggested that this remain ad hoc, and that perhaps the pool of potential participants might get a little bit bigger, because there wouldn't be the same group that would necessarily meet all the time, and that sometimes people would want to recuse themselves if they have a particular relationship with one of the parties that's involved. But it did seem, the participants agreed that this was a process that seemed to be heading in the direction of restorative justice. Again, this is not intended to replace the Justice System Commission or to be instead of some kind of a citizen concern group, but that this could be something that the village manager might have in his or her toolkit going forward if there's an issue, that it helps neutral people to hear the facts and report on what we heard. I would be really interested in hearing, Josue, what your thoughts are, and Chief Carlson, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the group's willingness and commitment to work through this process, not just as a first-time process and figuring out the kinks and working through an ad hoc personnel committee, but also the complexity of this case. And I say the complexity because I think the times when in the administration there are things that we may have an understanding of how things are, and is this, as I read the report, that there's some facts that were discovered in the process that I might have not, or someone else in the team might have not seen, how that there might have been a lack of understanding, a shared understanding about a particular policy. So I appreciate having that other folks weigh in on or take a look at these facts for what they are. In terms of moving forward, I think there's some good things that came out of this process. There's obviously some things that we need to refine, particularly around the guidelines and the exact procedures, and perhaps some training around those issues, so that if another ad hoc committee is to be established, we already have some best practices and some training that folks could easily roll into and be able to pick up the task of reviewing a particular case or the facts of a case much easier than perhaps the first group did. So there's a lesson to be learned there. There's another thing you mentioned, that having this as an additional tool. I agree that it is. It provides an opportunity to have another tool in the toolbox. Not everything's straightforward. And as we look to review all the outcomes of this process, I've still yet to meet with our HR director, police chief, and other members of the executive team to see how this fits within their particular departments. Because we have different types of different functions in different departments, and they tend to operate different just because of the type of work. There are things that there's certain work in our organization that's very clear and precise. You do A, B, and C, and you don't do E until you do D. The police department and how some of the state policies are written, they're not as descriptive. So there's still much more reviewing to be done for the ad hoc committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Agree with Josue. I'm very grateful for everyone being so willing to participate in this. I've found on the front end the logistics, the physical side of this was the most difficult. But I think in the spirit of approaching everything with as much transparency, as fair, as balanced as we can be, is the direction that we should move forward in. So I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where we can go from this point. But I thank you all very much for this.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Megan?
Megan Bachman, Yellow Springs News. I can appreciate that it was definitely a learning curve for all of us, me included, as I tried to understand kind of the new process. And I know it was an ad hoc and trying it out. I would recommend moving forward that it is actually put in as part of the policy, just so there's real clarity and transparency with the community of how it is used, kind of the rules. I think especially this pool of people, who selects them, how they're selected, on what basis, where that conflict of interest does arise. I think just letting it fall on them is probably not, I don't think, the best way to move forward, because then there can be allegations that arise of, well, this person, do you know what happened to them? 20 years ago, they got, you know what I mean? Like, it's a small town. So I would like to see that actually fleshed out in the policy, and not that it would have to be used every time as part of the policy, but as a tool, I think, as somebody said. So thank you all for sharing and for talking about the process openly at council.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
I felt, it was an excellent report. Thank you. I felt like I really got a sense of the process. It also did seem like the process worked well. And the other comment I have was actually, I think, Lisa, your last one, about the discipline process, that it's a punishment process. That's sort of what I was gathering. And I don't know how much of the police discipline process is structured by, if any, is structured by state law. But I really appreciated you wrote one paragraph about the impact of that, and if there are ways that police, when an officer does something that is not following policy, first of all, I guess finding out, is the policy clear, in which case it seemed like there were some things that weren't clear. Is the communication clear? It seemed like there were some things that weren't clear. And that the impact of this is to move toward learning and changing behavior, which doesn't necessarily come out of being punished.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about our retreat agenda, which is scheduled for January 15th. Our newest council member, Laura Curlis, will be joining us then, and before then, on January 6th. So Judy has put together a draft that reflects some of the things that we talked about. And so I'd be curious about any feedback.
One of the things that we talked about in the Environmental Commission, when we were talking about commission effectiveness, was people's interest in having a stronger relationship with council, but also having a stronger relationship with other commissions. Like, do people on council know who is on a commission? Does the Environmental Commission know who's on the Housing Commission or the Planning Commission? How can the commissions work together? So I just would like to see that as part of that initial discussion about effectiveness.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that, I noticed that in the EC minutes. Okay. Other comments? Okay, so, I have three things. So the first one is, I think we should flip the village team update with the council goals.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that conversation is gonna inform the priorities and so forth, and what we look at for focusing in 2020. The second thing that occurred to me, a couple conversations recently, is I think it might be good to have a little time at the end to talk about council roles and village manager roles, and sort of how we coordinate. And I feel like that flows from, the village team update to the goals to then how do we make these goals happen. And then the last thing is, I wonder if we need 3 hours for commission stuff.
We only have 1 hour.
Looks like we've got
Oh,
9 to 10 and then 10 to
yeah,
12.
Yeah, I see what you mean, yeah.
So I guess I'd like to particularly have more time for the team piece. So I would suggest that 2 hours is a lot of time for commission stuff. And that would give us, if we took that hour, that would give us a little bit more time for the team update, and then also to talk about roles at the end.
I agree, and I guess following that thinking even a little further, the commission is an extension of our goals, and our goals are informed by the team updates. So maybe start the morning
Yeah.
with the village team update,
Yeah, I
and then
agree.
go to goals, and then do the commission stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's great.
And in the goal discussion, are we looking at what we've done in 219, or are we moving into 220, or both?
So I think it's both, and I think what I will have is, our goal sheet from 2019 that's color-coded, and I'll update that. And so I think that we need to have that in front of us. But I think we also need to have what we put together with our priority list when we had that meeting in the middle of the year, because I do get the sense that we're all trying to get more outcome-oriented and more concise and direct. And so, I think that maybe can give us a contrast point to how we want to articulate 2020.
Maybe council goal discussion could be 2 hours instead of an hour and a half, and that extra half hour could have some break time, like 2 15-minute breaks or half-hour break or something.
Those are just kind of presumed in there. I mean, I've stuck them in before, and it tends to just sort of, sometimes you're flowing along and you just roll over it, and they tend to occur randomly. So I just didn't put them in, but I can, if you want to know that you can go get that drink.
Well, I think that the goals could be 2 hours, and then if we just want to do breaks whenever, that's fine.
Okay. Is that clear enough?
How much time do you want to allot for the team update and pending projects? 'Cause
2 hours?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so just to clarify, because I think I had been thinking of it differently than Josue had, do you want team members present, or is this a report out from Josue to?
I think that's up to you and your leadership team. So, with the caveat that we can't do the 4-hour infrastructure deep dive. So, which is great to do, but we've gotta be a little bit more like higher level.
Okay.
So, but still, that's, I think, getting that detail, some level of detail would be important.
So we'll have the 2 hours for all operations and project updates.
Yep. And then I guess, it would be a good idea for you guys to be thinking about it from the perspective of what we prioritized in 2019. And then how maybe we need to shift focus on some things.
Okay.
I have sort of I guess I'll call it a process question. We are going to be talking about which businesses should be retained. Just wondering how much anecdotal data we're going to have, what quantitative data. Have we gotten all those assessments back from all of the commissions?
I am not that person.
Well, do you have EC? Do you have HRC?
It's in process.
I have no one's information, so.
I think Lisa, my understanding was Lisa said, you said to
I
send
would
them
send,
to
I
you.
said I was not going to mix it all together, I was just gonna accumulate it. So,
Okay, well, get yours.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think most of the groups are approving their feedback in the January meetings. So, then I'll be able to get those and put them all together in time for the retreat.
Right.
Unless they're done sooner.
So then Judy, you would need things by that Monday for the packet?
Is that a meeting Monday?
No,
I can't.
it's not.
Yes, that'll work. Yeah, because we don't have to, it doesn't have to go out online, it doesn't have to,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
get it later.
Okay. Anything else? All right. I think it's going to be a meaty retreat. All right, which is good. Okay. So retreat, sounds like we're in a good position. So Josue, I think you're up next with takeaways from the temporary transportation project.
Okay. We have a presentation. This presentation is to review some of the survey data. Actually, all of the survey data was submitted. We did a presentation at the last council meeting just to review the summary data. In this version, I've done some comparison by stakeholder, which is useful to see how different groups have responded to the initiative. Now, I also want to preface this presentation, putting it in the context of how the survey was executed and what to take of all this data. I would not say that the data captured is a representative sample of Yellow Springs as a community. I wouldn't say that this survey is it. This is what the community says and feels in its entirety. I think that there's some elements that would have skewed the data. One, that it was primarily an online survey. The vast majority of responses came online. We did a select paper responses at the senior center. The folks the online survey might have been influenced by particular groups of individuals with certain concerns, whether it was the no right turn or one way or parking, whatever it may be. And I think that there was enough conversation around those topics that might have skewed the data. So I just want to preface that I think there's a lot in this survey to learn from. There's a lot of information to follow up on. But because of how it was executed, being a primarily online survey, I would not take this to be a random sample and being representative of the community. Okay, that being said, I'll jump in and do a summary review, and because of the time constraint, I will move through these as quickly as possible. Please feel free to jump in with any questions. So this is the resident breakdown, the Response breakdown by the stakeholder group, this is how they identify. Vast majority of folks identify as residents. Now, the question also allowed them to select all that apply. So they could be a resident, they could be a student, or they could be a resident, a parent, and then a business owner, and the information will be captured. This is overall the response. This response, the first set of slides are the responses of the entire group, all grouped together. So in the second question, did the traffic pattern have a positive impact? You see that 18% strongly agree, 14% agree, and about 18%, 17% neither agree nor disagree. And with 50% of people either disagreeing or strongly disagree. Do you feel safer using the crosswalks at South Walnut and Shore Street? 34.5% yes, 56% no. Do you feel the one-way design on South Walnut has made school drop-off safer for children at Mills Lawn? 46.1% said yes, 38% no. The others were, there was an other category, and folks were either yes or they were conditional responses. Question 7, has the traffic pattern had a positive impact on parking along South Walnut between Short and Limestone? Strongly agrees 18%, agree 15%, neither agree nor disagree 26.7%, with disagree 17 and strongly disagree 22.9, 23%. Has the traffic pattern had a positive impact on parking along Short Street between Xenia Avenue and South Walnut? Strongly agree, 18%, agree, 16%, neither agree nor disagree, 23%, disagree, 19%, and strongly disagree, 23%. Do you support making South Walnut Street one-way from Shore Street to Limestone? Yes at 39%, no at 55%. Do you support making South Walnut Street a right turn only? Yes at 22.8, 23%, and no at 71.5%. Do you support making Shore Street one-way from Xenia to South Walnut? Yes at 40%, no at 53%. Now I get into the additional analysis we did. I looked at the survey responses during and post the trial. I think it was important to see at what period folks submitted a survey. This chart here indicates the number of responses received by date. That's the blue bar graphs, and then there's a running total line graph in red that adds up all the responses submitted. So you'll see that that about 50% of the surveys were received within that first week of the survey being available, which was the second week of the trial taking place. So a lot of 50% of folks had responded within that second week of the trial. So I think it was fresh for many people, and they might have been motivated to submit a response. And you see the other half takes place over the third week of the trial and into the additional 2 weeks that the survey was available. These next set of slides, I'll walk you through some of the color scheme here. This compares the 7 stakeholder groups, that being the property owners being at the very top, the property owners of commercial property. The second row is the owners of nearby residential property. The third row is parents as students of Mills Lawn School. Fourth is students at the Mills Lawn School. Fifth is employees of a Yellow Springs business. 6 is business owners, and 7 is resident. The bar graph colors, the light blue is strongly agree. The dark blue is agree. The yellow is neither agree nor disagree. The light blue, the first strongly agree is light green. The disagree is the light blue, and that's typically you'll see on the first 2 bar graphs, the second and fourth piece of the bar graph, and lower the bottom remains on the fourth. So that's the disagree, and then the orange is strongly disagree. I compiled this stack bar graph so you can see how the responses changed by stakeholder. So in this particular question, did the traffic pattern have a positive impact? You see that students at the school, over 60% of them either strongly agree or agree, while you see that the stakeholder group that responded the least favorable to this would have been nearby commercial property owners in Yellow Springs. The parents at the Mills Lawn also strongly supported the initiative. You see that that bar graph between the sum total of the strongly agree and agree makes up more than 60% of a little over 60% of the bar graph. So this helps visually take in that information on how the different stakeholder groups responded to the survey via the responses of the agree, neither agree nor disagree, or disagree, strongly disagree. Any questions on this bar graph? Any questions on how it's organized? So this is the format that the following questions that the information is responded to or provided in the similar format.
I don't have a question, but I think it's useful to look at the different stakeholder groups, and in the future, in considering something like this, maybe reaching out to the groups in some way beforehand, as part of the process that we do beforehand.
Yes, I think one of the takeaways, and I get to that, one of the takeaways, I think it's managing expectations and managing the information out to the public. And I'll get to that.
Yeah, and that's why I'd be interested in seeing how some of the stakeholders responded to some of the following questions, and I would, I guess I would not, as I think I heard you say, submit that parents, for example, who did answer positively to question 2, and I would imagine question 4 also, which is specifically about the drop-off. You know, I would, but I'd be interested in seeing how those groups compared or spoke to the overall initiative with respect to the traffic patterns. But those who have a heavier stake in questions related to child safety, you know, the parents and the students, you know, that's just one piece of it. And I think my interpretation of that would be, yeah, the drop-off part is good, but not because of the changes in traffic.
Correct.
I'll speak more to that.
Yes, and that's in one of my takeaways. Overall, there's a positive impact on the traffic flow and safety when you're looking at just the children drop-off. And if that's the problem to solve, then you know that we get right at it. But I think there's more to read into it than just to say yes. This is made drop-off safer. Why did it make it safer? There are a lot of constraints that we put on traffic flow that ensured that was the case, that it felt safer for folks using the drop-off lane.
I think it would be beneficial on the bar graph up here to see the number of responses for each of those on the same bar graph, so you can see.
Yeah.
Yes, and I try manipulating the chart to account for the number of responses. The challenge is that for give you an example, the challenge that some groups were significantly oversized to the others. So with residents being the single largest stakeholder group, and it overlaps over the several other groups, looking at students at Mills Lawn, the response, it was just such tiny because there are only 17 responses. So try to overlay that, demonstrate the total number of summaries made it challenging. But we do have that information, and I've got 10 minutes, and what do I get in, how much information can I squeeze in 10 minutes?
Sounds good.
So I'll move on to the next slide. Do you feel safer using the crosswalks at South Walnut and Short Streets? You see here that the parents at Mills Lawn, over 70% of them indicated that yes, they feel safer, and students, 80% of them felt safer, with the lowest group being owners of nearby commercial property, followed by business owners, and then owners of nearby residential property. So being able to break out the stakeholder group, you'll see which part of the initiative created greater value for that stakeholder, and that's evident in the responses. Any question on this slide? Do you feel the one-way design on South Walnut Street has made school drop-off safer for children at Mills Lawn? Kevin, this gets at your question. Looking at these responses, the vast majority of folks felt that yes, this make for a safer drop-off for children at Mills Lawn. I think the only group that felt that no was the business owners, and that's a much smaller group. So just a small sample of that group would have tipped the scale significantly. Question number 7, has the traffic pattern had a positive impact on parking along South Walnut between Short Street and Limestone? You see there's a pretty good distribution to this response across all stakeholder groups. What I will point out is that parking, the parents, over 60% of them strongly agree that this was a positive impact, followed by students, but students are not parking, or not that I know of any Mills Lawn kids parking in those spaces. Has traffic pattern change had a positive impact on parking along Shore Street between Xenia and South Walnut Street? Again, the students and the parents responded very positive to this. The business owners demonstrated the least amount of positive impact or responded least favorably to this question. Any questions on this? Do you support making South Walnut Street one-way from Short Street to Limestone? The two groups that responded positive to this are parents and students. Least favorable are the owners of nearby commercial property and business owners. Do you support making South Walnut Street a right turn only onto Limestone? I think this is the least, this didn't go so well with most groups, with most stakeholder groups, except for the parents at Mills Lawn. Over 50% of them indicated yes, that they support this initiative. Question number 11, do you support making Short Street one-way from Xenia Avenue to South Walnut Street? Again, the parents and the students responded most favorably to this initiative, or this aspect of the initiative. The other stakeholder groups were pretty consistent in their response at around 40% would favor this initiative. So the takeaways here, I have grouped them into 4 areas. One of them is that there is this overall positive impact when it came to traffic flow and safety. The easy one to answer there is the safety. As you can see from the data, people responded favorably to the safety of the children, particularly the parents as a stakeholder group. One of the things that I've read in the comment sessions of several of the questions, several of the open-ended questions, is that almost anything that we did to control traffic and be more descriptive about to where drop-off children would have had an impact. And that's reflected in this initiative. So I think that's a positive takeaway for us, because the drop-off did work, and having it be very fixed and instructive to where people could drop off and how to drop off significantly improved the flow and the time that it took to drop off, with the exception of the first few days that the activity kicked in. So that's positive. The second item, the question related to the Walnut being one way, I think from focusing on the school and the school safety, that initiative works. It does create an inconvenience, at least from the survey data and the folks that provided testimony to this body, that it does create an inconvenience for folks who are either used to traveling in that direction, whether that's to the distillery or their way to the gym or wherever it's going. Their folks are settled in which routes to take, and that seemed to be an adjustment issue. When we looked at the issue of at the traffic flow and providing alternatives, we saw that the most vehicle would have to reroute would be those that are coming from North Walnut and coming onto South Walnut and are expecting to make that left on Limestone. As we draw it out, we said, well, folks could just turn right onto Elm, go up to Phillip, turn left onto Phillip, then go to Limestone, turn left again, and they're back where they would have been if they were allowed to make that left turn. I think there's an issue of educating folks, providing information as to what routes they could take. I think most folks, because of out of habit, they would have missed the cue to turn right onto Elm Street and go around the school. They would have just gone down to Limestone, and then they're stuck in a situation where they could only turn right, and that pushed traffic onto Limestone and then onto Phillip or other parts of the neighborhood. On items related to Short Street, this is, it's certainly created for a better visual, better line of sight, orderly parking, but it did come with its challenges. Cars parking too far up to the sidewalk, things that in a permanent solution we can mitigate. We can put this tire stoppers and that will resolve that issue. The other significant positive impact that this had is the reducing the number of vehicles that come down Short Street to turn left onto Xenia Avenue. We see that as a risky left turn, not just for vehicles but for pedestrians, just because of how that left turn takes place. So certainly we see some value on the Short Street one-way from a pedestrian and vehicle safety. So there's some, I think that's worth considering how to implement that or finding ways to make that successful. The right turn only, I think from the survey responses, you'll see that there was no success here. If you take that data, I think this particular part of the initiative became very difficult to assess on the value because there were a group of people intentionally breaking the rule and making that left turn, whether it was on the left-hand lane or going around the barriers or making the right turn, pulling into the driveways and making the U-turn. So there were a lot of that behavioral issues that made this particular part of the initiative challenging to measure the success because it's so driven by behavioral and just folks, this is the initiative that folks adapted to the least. So did it change the behavior? I think that's an indicator that there's some work for us to do on that part of the plan.
Well, didn't the stop sign come after the fact? Wasn't it a yield sign before?
It was a yield sign, so.
So I feel like that's a victory.
Yes, so that's been I think it's a good control device, traffic control device, because there are a lot of folks that are making that left turn, and I think that it's too much of a risk to put it as a yield sign because you can't really see all the cars that are coming down Xenia and could be turning that right onto Limestone. So the stop sign, it's certainly one of the successes of the initiative. That we're able to determine that and concretely say, well, this deserves to be a stop sign and moves forward a stop sign. Overall, I think there's a lot of positive things we learned about this. I think there's some behavioral issues that we need to address, and some of that is not just through a design process, but I think it's through a shares value system. The other concern I have is that the initiative was also designed to test things that would make what's contemplated in the active transportation plan. It's designed to test some of those things that we got a bit closer to, but perhaps maybe also farther away. In the active transportation plan, it contemplated having a shared lane for bicycles and other things. I'm sorry, another use of the lanes, whether they're walking or strolling. And that's very difficult to test because we can't build out a bike lane just to test that. One of the key things to make that successful will be turning South Walnut Street into a one-way street. And this allows us to test that other component of the active transportation plan. I think we saw some successes, but I think there are some behavioral challenges, traffic behavior challenges that we need to address to make it successful and be able to build out the lane. Brian, did you want to add anything?
No, I pretty much agree with Josue's comments.
So, yeah, I mentioned earlier that certainly the students and parents of students, did seem to have the strongest reaction about, making changes to the drop-off area, which, is sort of misleading for a couple of reasons. And before I go there, I'm intrigued that we didn't have the opportunity for teachers to identify themselves. Because of whoever is parking wherever they're parking, in front of and around the school. So it can sort of be misleading when, like I say, you see those very strong yeses from those folks who have a very high interest. And I think we certainly could have invited the opportunity for folks to identify themselves as teachers or otherwise affiliated with the school. And at the end of the day, in that, whatever the situation was, or however you identify the situation, good, bad, or ugly, doing anything obviously would make it better. And so, whether it was just, identifying a clear drop-off lane, regardless of the directional flow of the traffic on the street, I think that's the number one thing. And I'm certainly interested in hearing whatever the school is offering, the school system or the school in particular is offering to do for the safety of the drop-off of the students. We talk about the left turn from Short Street onto 68 or into Xenia. A no left turn sign would fix that. So, I think, again, there is a lot of good data to work with. I think when you look at the overall population, the greater number of people, I think you do end up on the less than positive side in terms of constituents, and certainly compared to everything else we hear. So I think we know we have a better idea maybe of what not to do in some regards, because there are some very strong, I think, opinions from the constituents that we've heard from of what they don't like. But obviously, doing anything to make the drop-off itself safer is a good thing. And so, but I believe that can be done without making the other major traffic changes. That all those parking spots right in front of the school that I presume are cars that belong to teachers. If those aren't there, that's your drop-off lane. Without having to do any construction or cutting corners or anything else. So.
And I'm pretty sure those aren't teachers because they have a back parking lot. So that,
All right, so I will retract that. I think we should identify whose those cars are and go from there. But I was led to believe by someone affiliated with the school that those are teachers. And I will allow, since it was secondhand, that I might be wrong. So, no parking either all day or during school drop-off hours or school hours or whatever. I think that is the way to go. So good, positive effort, in that we did want to test it by making the changes instead of just hypothesizing about it. That's why, I hadn't been very vocal about it, because I'm okay with making temporary changes, because it was always meant to be temporary to see what it was like. But the average Joe, as it were, was not, in my reading, very thrilled with the traffic changes, although everyone agreed that doing anything to make drop-off better is positive.
A couple of things in what you said. There's some clear things here that did work. I think there was an issue of perhaps we added too many things to the initiative. And as I was thinking about the process, I thought that our constituency could evaluate the different elements of it on their own, and they didn't stand on their own. I think the right-hand turn, for example, on South Walnut to Limestone, I think that affected how folks view the rest of the initiative. So with all the parking, my approach is to the initiative where if we're gonna go through this process and disrupt the flow and test things, could we just test as many of these things as possible for cost efficiency purposes? We're gonna do this for 3 weeks, let's evaluate it, and there are all these things that we felt that added value to each other. For example, the diagonal parking on both South Walnut and Shore Street, I thought that those things would add value to the exercise, while also allowing us to try something new that we thought could have a positive impact on parking. With the Short Street, there was 12 spots before the initiative, and there were 12 spots during the initiative. And we could have squeezed in more parking, but we made some judgment calls that when we executed the initiative, and that was to create the bicycle parking. We want to allow more room, and so we made those changes. Part of the conversations, well, there are no changes in parking. There's 12 before and there's 12 during, but there were the 12 parking spots that were created during the initiative were guaranteed parking spots, because the cars could not take up more of the parallel parking spaces that they typically do now. You can fit 12 cars in there, and that provided some certainty. It allowed for longer vehicles to park, and there's value created in this activity that were difficult to measure without having a 30-question survey and having the other activities influence particular items of the initiative. So there were perhaps too many things that we added onto there. So for me, that's a learning opportunity and initiative, how I go about developing and executing future activities. There's also a communication piece that Mary Ann referenced earlier. There are things that we would do in the future to get buy-in, to get other stakeholders involved earlier in the process and during the process. You mentioned having the teachers identify themselves. We've got 7 different stakeholder groups already identify, adding, you can add many more, but there's then you're just collecting a whole lot of data, and it's difficult to analyze it all. Just in the survey, we had 704 survey responses. That's pretty high. I expected somewhere around 150. That's it. If I get 150, great. We got 700 responses. All right. So
will any final decisions be pending the completion of the comprehensive plan?
we have share the active transportation plan with the comprehensive land use plan, and having that inform some of the recommendations of the comprehensive land use plan. So certainly this is one of the documents that the consultant and the group are looking at to create the final comprehensive land use plan. This is in addition to all the inputs that the consultant is getting from this steering committee and the stakeholder groups. And those stakeholder groups have particular concern. You see it in this transportation, that if we're looking at having a safer environment, a school environment for parents and children, this initiative gets us there. So that's, if we were to weigh that over, say, the commercial property owners who were the ones responded least favorably to the initiative, how do we weigh those interests to come up with the final solution?
So do you have next steps in regard to this particular, the things that this particular project was supposed to address?
Yes, well, we got one, we've taken the liberty to execute one, and that's the stop sign.
Yeah.
We're working on looking at solutions for the drop-off, the drop-off lane and the school drop-off. We have a meeting scheduled with the school in the near future, and that's one of the items on my agenda, to talk through some of those issues. So we know those are low-hanging fruit that we can address with minimal cost infrastructure development.
And yeah, and then to just reemphasize what Josue referred to, so we are actively meeting with school leadership, with Terry and with Steve Kahn, to talk about what's possible, kind of related to what you were saying, Kevin.
Right. Or are there any suggestions, feedback, recommendations from council? Some of the things that you want to see happen in terms of next steps?
I think when you meet with the schools, I think that they should send home maybe like a survey of how parents visualize safe drop-off. Because I think that, yeah, parents want safe drop-off, but I'm just wondering if that's what it looks like to them, or I've heard parents having other ideas of what it looks like to them. So I think it would be really important to kind of visualize what safe drop-off looks like to the parents of students at Mills Lawn right now.
And we hope through collaboration with the schools to be able to get at, since that is a stakeholder group that they have access to, and not so much us.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, when you speak with them, that would be pretty easy to drop into the parents' little folders and stuff.
How many folks did identify as parents?
Parents, 185. That is 26.3%. And students were 2.4%, total 17 students. The commercial property owners, that's 2% with 14 responses. So, versus the residents at 557 respondents. So, Kenetta, that gets to your question of proportionalities of these different stakeholder groups. Now, I want to note that someone could identify themselves as resident, as a business owner, and as a parent. And so those three overlap. The primary identifier was resident.
Okay.
So, this is not necessary, but I wondered what a narrative statement would look like for each constituent group. In other words, I'm a resident, and if I laid out all of the questions, all my responses to a question, and made a narrative, I'd say, an example would be, wow, the safety situation improved because it was a dedicated drop-off. But I didn't like the one-way on Walnut, I didn't like the one-way on Short Street, I didn't like the no left turn, onto Limestone. And I don't know if that's easy to pull out there. Again, it's not necessary. But the information is there. But like I said, we pick a constituent group and then take those 3 or 4, major questions and create a narrative. I think that's about where we'd be. I like improving safety, but this was not the way to do it.
The data's there, and we can get at some of those responses in terms of the data pathways. If a parent responded positive or in one way to this question, how do they respond to all the other questions? Our attempt to get at some of that story of how the sentiment changes is by comparing the stakeholders with their responses here. We're able to highlight some of that, just, this particular side, the positive impact. You see how the different stakeholder groups, but yes, we can get to it. It's a matter of how deep we want to get into this.
Right, yeah. Well, I think the conversations that you have planned should continue, and have appropriate reach out and feedback from all, of the stakeholders.
Right.
Because obviously, we don't know, whether what teachers are up there, and at least in terms of sit-down conversations, we know we haven't had all that we should have had, with school staff, with district staff.
Right, and just to summarize that and what you're stating, Kevin, that there are certain viewpoints that might not be reflective here because, again, this was primarily online. There's a large influence by the resident group. well, the parents have a particular view about things. So I just want to highlight that. This is certainly not the entire story, and there's more to get there. But overall, there's a positive impact on traffic flow and safety. Whether people are, liked it or didn't like it, it did make the situation better. And there's so many things to take away from it. The short street one-way, that certainly solves that problem of cars turning left onto Xenia Avenue. It eliminates that problem by design. Right? And those are certain decisions that perhaps the administration needs to review and evaluate and make a decision on, even if it creates a challenge for certain individuals that may be very vocal.
This question is outside the scope of this.
I want to point out that this has taken a half hour and it was 10-minute discussion, so.
Well, I'm sort of changing subjects. I think Johnny talked about changing the light at Xenia and Limestone.
That it was gonna
Yeah.
have a left-hand turn signal?
Right.
Yes, we're evaluating putting in a left turn signal from Xenia onto Limestone and having clear markings of cars being able to go around vehicles turning left onto Limestone. You might have noticed that there are a lot, well, you should probably know that there's cars that turn left, and some folks pull really close to the line, or they pull in the middle line, or all the way to the right and block off traffic.
Yeah.
So we want to better manage that traffic flow by putting in a light signal and markings if there's enough space so that cars can go around while others turn left, or putting in that signal for left signal for cars to turn left, clear the road,
Yep.
and then move forward. And that's a separate issue than this, and I
Yep.
think that
See?
we're evaluating it.
All right,
Thank you.
yeah. All right, so hopefully we won't have too many more separate issues. Mitzi, come on up.
I would just like a few minutes regarding this issue. Teresa Mayer wrote a really good article in the paper, and I want to thank you for addressing bumpers so people wouldn't go beyond the sidewalk. The one thing I think I noted in that letter was about location of handicap parking. And I just want you to please consider that in location that it's accessible downtown for them, and that consideration is put up at the top. Also, the amount of room it takes to, if you have a wheelchair, to get out of a car, making sure you're allowing the appropriate space so somebody could remove a wheelchair. On school grounds as well, I know we have individuals who are disabled as well, or have children that are. So I think that's really critical. I think what Kevin, you said involving the school is really critical. As being a retired teacher, we had duties, and we had to be out there. And I think the other thing is putting in some kind of school handbook, what the directions are and rules of, drop-offs is really important in that educational component. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitzi.
Thank you, Mr.
Megan?
Few comments. First of all, 13 spots on Short Street. There's 13 today.
Okay.
And we disagreed on some of that parking counts. First, I just have a question if anybody knows about the Mills Lawn students, if that was a class, because it looked like all the responses came in at the same time. Just curious if anybody had information about that. I'll just put out all my questions and then. Second of all, the last two meetings, there was talk about the issues of possible duplicates in the survey. I did look at that myself. It looked like 2 were clear duplicates, accidental, must have hit the button twice. 1 possible, and then maybe 3 were probably people of the same household. Maybe just as likely people of the same household, so 7. I don't know what your analysis found. Yeah, I've done a few surveys for the Yellow Springs News of the population. One thing about Yellow Springs surveys is they love the comment sections, and you offered comment sections in almost every question. So there are a ton of comments from the community about this. And did in my graduate time. Coding comments is a big effort, but there is so much rich data. I mean, this is just, really the tip of the iceberg in terms of like people's experience. What were the challenges for them? They really go into great detail. I think like 500 comments on that last question of, do you have any other comments? So I'm just curious what will be done with the comments. It would be my suggestion if that the comments are also input into the comprehensive planning process, because they really do move beyond just this initial trial to other safety issues. That's actually one of the questions, is what else can we do to improve, safety in this area. I'm again going to ask the question about cost, just if the village would summarize the cost again, looking to do this again, and how I also would, ask council to consider other costs beyond financial costs, the risks of doing something like this. Are there any costs in terms of impact on the community? And I don't know, I would ask you to consider that as a possible, thing moving forward. Was there a risk to safety? Was there a cost to people's, I don't know, just something to consider. And again, with the next steps, I would be curious, specifically, the comment, overall, this is an improvement in traffic flow and safety, and I see that there were comments about safety, about school pickup and drop-off, but that overall comment, I didn't see that in the survey results myself. I would be wondering how the village came to that assessment, that this plan improved traffic flow and safety. And again, what other data might be useful in coming to that conclusion? Thank you.
On your question to students, I don't know if it was a class, we've shared the links with the school and asked them to distribute the survey. So I don't know how the 17 students that took the survey, they all sat down together and took it. Yes, there are rich comments in the 3 open-ended questions. And as you noted, yes, there are hundreds of comments. I've actually compiled the Word document with all these comments by question, and there are 88 pages of comments. So there's a lot of good information there, and there's some that folks ranting, or one particular person copied a letter to the editor and just dumped it in one of the questions. So there's a lot of comments there. I'm more than happy to share with the council as either included in the packet or as a document for light reading or reading by the council.
I'd suggest it gets shared with the Active Transportation Committee.
Okay.
Comprehensive plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I do want to read those comments.
As do I.
I mean, I remember back when we started council, we had a community conversation that the HRC led, and it was very extensive as well.
Okay.
So that'd be good to have.
So I would send the Excel file with all the data, and I would send a separate Word document with the comments by question.
Okay.
Make it easier for you to
Thank you.
think it through. And then cost. We'll follow up on that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Just a quick one. Ari Greenwald with Cresco Labs.
Hey, Ari.
Hey, I was just curious, in your analysis, since you have it by time, I'm curious if the people who responded right away, you said there were a lot of them, if you would resurvey them after they got used to it, after the learning curve, would they have the same response? Like, did they learn, turn down a different street ahead of time? Is it that big of a deal? It might be interesting if you could reach back out to the first group of people, that 50%, and see if their opinion changed. Or if you could just compare like the first week versus the last week and see what the responses were. Just a thought.
Thank you, Ari.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And let's move to a Housing Advisory Board update, which I guess Josue and Marianne are going to present.
Oh, what are you trying to do?
Get out of there.
I think your screen switched to this. If we can find a mouse.
Are you calling up the
You can just have it up there.
the resolution?
Nope. Nope, continue on your way.
Sorry, we're having technical issues here. There you go. Just drag the screen over to that side.
I could start.
Yeah,
while-
start, this does not
Yeah,
have
yeah.
anything to do with you.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Carry on.
So, ooh, now it's black. So approximately a year ago, I think maybe in the fall, council passed a resolution supporting housing goals that would be pursued by the Housing Advisory Board. Previous to that, council had approved a vision for housing. I met with Brian and Josue and also Judith Hempfling, who's on the Housing Advisory Board, to assess sort of where our housing effort is. There had been a lot of activity, and then the last year, really, there's been a lot of conversation in the board, primarily focused on housing in the Glass Farm and more recently the Glass Farm area. And also during that time, we've had a new village manager in Josue. So that is taking some time to sort of and we've had some people leave the board and some people come on. So we thought it would be good to assess where we are and reaffirm our commitment to housing, which has been a primary goal for council for some years. And at the same time, the amount of housing that's been created has been minimal. So we included the resolution that council affirmed last year with those housing goals and wanted to reaffirm that council is still supporting that. I think I'll just read that section. These goals were developed, they're sort of summarized by the work that Patrick Bowen did, who was our consultant for the housing needs assessment. And that work, I think that's included there. It's a multi-page document, but it's pretty dense. So the housing goals that council affirmed last year, the purpose is to encourage greater housing choice as a strategy to build a diverse community, which includes seniors, young adults, and families, and represents persons from varied ethnic and racial groups and economic strata. And under that, the bullet points are to actively support an increase in housing stock over the next 10 to 15 years of 300 to 500 housing units. And I'll note that Patrick Bowen actually suggested doing this amount of housing in 5 years, which we thought was a stretch. So we have spread the years out. This stock should ideally be increased by a ratio of 60% rental to 40% purchase units. That is acknowledging both the loss of rental housing proportionally in Yellow Springs. Also, I think not only proportionally, but actual numbers of housing units, as well as the increase nationwide and locally of more people looking for rental housing than, or I should say, an increased interest in rental housing over home ownership. That shift, which probably happened in the housing debacle in the last decade, but it has various reasons. A lot of young people are more interested in renting. Home ownership isn't seen as the same, meaning you're an American if you own your home, that sort of thing. And people move a lot. At any rate, so this goal would be developing 60% rental to 40% home ownership units. And that the rental units should be targeted to low and moderate income households with a smaller number targeted to upper income households. And then in parentheses, subsidies will be needed for very low income and also some low income households, below 80% of the area median income, because the market cannot generally serve these needs. Then perch home ownership units should be targeted to low, moderate, and this is 80% to 100% of area median income. In other words, housing units, we would be targeting not the very low income in general, but we could say workforce housing. And moderate income, 100 to 120% of area median income, and upper income over 120% of area median income households. And subsidies would be needed for low, moderate, and some moderate income households. Then the last two sentences. These goals are based on recommendations made by Patrick Bowen of Bowen National Research in his August 20th, 2018 presentation to Village Council. The more detailed Bowen recommendations will be included in the final Yellow Springs Housing Plan to be completed in early 2019. Well, that plan exists in draft form, but it was not completed and it has not been approved by council. So when I met with Judith and Josue and Brian, one of the things that Brian suggested was that the Housing Advisory Board focus on some specific goals. And let's see, we met, I forget, Thursday or something, so we didn't have time to get anything in the packet, nor have we had time to talk about the goals that I suggested. But, and they're not in the council packet either, but I'd like to read the suggested goals for the Housing Advisory Board and have a conversation with council. So I've suggested 4 goals. 1, complete the draft housing plan as a living document to be included in the updated online comprehensive land use plan. 2, these are goals, as I said, for the Housing Advisory Board. 2, lead the housing concept design and development of the Glass Farm area and develop a timeline for the work. So this does not mean that the Housing Advisory Board would develop the concept, and certainly the village government is not going to do the development, but the Housing Advisory Board would take leadership in moving these, which is quite a big project, along, and it clearly would not be completed in 2010. I mean, it's a multi-year project. 3, ensure that the Glass Farm area housing is informed by the council overall housing goals, in particular related to rental and affordable housing. So the Glass Farm is the only land at this point that the village owns that is suitable for housing. Given that moderate income and lower income housing is difficult to develop and the market does not always provide it, this is our primary opportunity to see that we have an impact on moderate and lower income housing and rental housing. We have not had any rental housing built, I don't know, maybe 50 years. The Green Metropolitan has built some rental housing, but market rate, there has been no rental housing since I moved here built since 1972. So I think the Bill Brown Apartments, which are called the townhouse, or what, I forget what they're called anyway.
And you're not thinking about the Home Inc. ones that were recently built, right? You mean?
No, I haven't, I mean, those have been built, but I'm thinking of
Market rate.
Like a
a
large
bulk.
scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the 4th goal would be to collaborate with Antioch College, the Yellow Springs Schools, Home Inc., and the Yellow Springs Development Corporation in developing housing to meet community needs. So I'm recommending that we discuss these goals, tweak them as needed, and then direct Josue to work with the Housing Board to focus on these goals. And I'm opening it up for council
So is
discussion.
this an update of the goals that you just read, or are we talking about both documents?
We're talking about two documents.
Okay, because there's still the idea of reaffirming those,
Yes,
but then also this is more directed towards
yes,
the advisory board.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yep.
for clarifying.
So, one thing that I thought about when I read last year's resolution and then reading this is, should we be highlighting permanent affordability a little bit more, or specifically? So I noticed in our, our support last year, we don't really talk about permanent affordability there. And I feel like that's an important piece to this.
I'll just highlight that Columbus, Ohio is doing that now after losing significant amounts of money over decades, after building affordable housing in up-and-coming neighborhoods, and after the 7 years of compliance ended up being like double the amount that the homeowners sell it for. So that's money that they invested in affordable housing, and not only did the people who initially bought the house get a return, as one should when buying a house, but they got double the return. So I think it would be important to just consider the investment and how that would interact over time versus just an initial investment that would be lost over a short period of time.
Yeah, that's critical, because otherwise, what happens is all the subsidy, whether it's the federal government, the state government, people going in and volunteering their time, people in Yellow Springs, the Yellow Springs, if that subsidy isn't permanently captured, it leaves with the first person that sells it after the time period is over. And then you no longer have an affordable house. So, yeah, it seems like in that, maybe we should reaffirm our goal and include a bullet point with that.
Because, I mean, obviously, it's something we've talked about from the get-go, but, yeah, having that in writing. But as far as the new goals for the advisory board, I think overall, it looks good. My main thought really is that next piece of work about how to action these. I mean, I think the buckets are right, but just thinking specifically like number 2 in particular, what does that look like, right? And you kind of reference that, so.
Yeah.
But I think as far as goals, they look good.
I agree. I mean, certainly, complete the plan. I mean, that's an obvious goal. Yeah, and I think 3 and 4, making sure that what happens at Glass Farm is informed, by the plans of interest. I just wrote CDC, get involved with housing for bullet 4, but I mistakenly, when you list out the different organizations, I thought that those were all the players in the CDC, but you had CDC plus other people, some of which are part of the CDC and some are not.
I listed those, the college, the schools, Home Inc., and the CDC, they all play different roles and have different interests
Right.
distinctly.
Right. And I guess I wasn't able to wrap my head around number 2, because it was long in terms of like.
Well,
what
I
the
think that's
timeline-
why not a lot has been done. No action. I mean, I shouldn't say no action, because actually, at our January meeting, at our Housing Advisory Board, we are going to be looking at some possible concept plans that Aaron Sorrell is doing as part of their work on the comp plan.
And the Housing Advisory Board has followed up with tasks related to what's happening in the marketplace, and we've been staying abreast of potential developments and staying informed, and I think that's been an important role of the HAP to keep the partners engaged. There's a potential development at Kinney Farm. It's not happening now, but it was an important element of the Housing Advisory Board to stay engaged with those parties so that we could work with them to help achieve the goals for the village.
Other comments?
Lisa?
I think I think these goals are along the right lines. I keep thinking, both in this conversation and the one before about traffic, how important the comprehensive land use plan is, and the timing of getting that completed, and how many other initiatives that informs. So, to me, that's such an important precursor. And I do appreciate the focus on collaboration, because I do think whatever happens with the glass farm, I agree that rental and affordable housing are priorities. I think it's going to be important to know what these other stakeholders that have properties are planning, so that we have this balance that we're trying to get to. So, it's a lot of work. I mean, these are just, one piece of paper, but when I go down into each one, it's a tremendous amount of work. So, kind of boggles the brain a little bit. It's exciting, though.
So, what are we bringing back the resolution and recommitment for our next meeting? Are we doing something tonight?
I would like to work on a statement about permanent affordability to include in that resolution for 2018 and bring it back for
Okay.
our next meeting.
Okay. And then, while you're looking at that, the top statement about racial, ethnic, and economic strata, I would suggest that we try to cover everything that's in our village value about being a welcoming
okay.
community. Because I think there are other, groups to maintain that diversity.
I agree, because that was one of the things I was going to add, was when thinking about housing, like thinking about where the market doesn't really meet people where they are, that would include people with disabilities. So oftentimes, people with physical disabilities have a hard time finding housing because houses that are already built aren't accommodating. So wanted to add that.
I think we did include all the groups in the vision statement, but not in this. So I think I'm hearing from council support of these goals, recognizing that they all could be flushed out, and that all of them, and especially number 2, is a deep dive.
Yeah.
Long dive. Josue, what do you?
Overall, these are things that we've been working on. We talked about the conceptual design. I think we've started to have that conversation before it was formalized into the current work of the comprehensive land use consultant. The steering committee for that group also, we're thinking along those same lines, and I appreciate how it's now come to the Housing Advisory Board to have a first look at it and have an opportunity to weigh in on that process. The others are certainly aligned with what we want to accomplish there. A conceptual design should meet the guidelines of what a housing plan is, and like you stated, Mary Ann, glass farm is our only asset that we can leverage to create an affordable product. An affordable product, I think we're talking about several different groups. It's not just low income, but we're talking a group that can go as high as 120% AMI. As I hear about the permanent affordability, I think there's an element of asset and wealth building that we should consider. I think the housing development was, many years ago, a tool used to create assets and wealth for a middle class. So when thinking about what does the future look like for a middle class, housing has been a significant component of building that middle class. That is the stranglehold now in keeping folks from, keeping society or your local economy or economy design of building that, the middle class. In addition to housing is wages. So how do we create a product or a system that also helps build the assets and wealth for future generations? Do I think it's in one generation? No. I know that my mom probably wouldn't have the retirement nest egg that she has now if it wasn't for how she made a wise investment in buying a property that has significantly improved, and it's a market property. So just thinking that's something that I think that we should also consider as we're thinking about developing affordable housing, thinking about creating systems that also allow for asset and wealth development so that families are not stuck and or feel that they're stuck or by design stuck in a single type of housing when there could be opportunities for them to move upward in the economic ladder.
And that's where I was just gonna say, that's where the community land trust model does come in. It does allow for wealth building while also maintaining affordability.
Maybe,
And I think that's a model, right? That's not the end all, but there are other, it's not just about the land trust model design, but there are other support systems and how a community works and collaborate to build that.
I was going to suggest that we might think about defining affordability in various ways, because there is the model of affordable housing that means there is subsidy going into the housing.
Right.
And that it's for a certain income range. Then there's another way of looking at it, of saying, if you can build a critical mass of moderate income housing, then that housing is affordable to middle-class people, market rate. So like if we can build new 250,000, that would be good, $250,000 homes. If we could build a critical mass of that, that would be affordable for a certain income range. And then affordability can also mean having rental housing or having more housing in general so that our market better reflects, it is not so tight. So I think it can have different meanings, and it might pay to sort of tease those out.
Sure. And I think, going back to when I brought up wanting to flag permanent affordability, I don't think what we're saying is we're gonna build 100% of our housing stock
Right.
to be permanently affordable, right? But that we need to look at different models and options, so.
And I would caution calling like market rate housing affordable. I think that we should talk about building market rate housing too, but I think that building affordable housing, we should talk about doing that and talk about doing market rate. I don't think we should label market rate housing as affordable. I don't know if you get what I'm saying there, but.
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of conversations about affordable housing. Should we even call it affordable housing? So,
Yeah, I think just to keep it clear about what if we're saying we want to make sure that we have low and moderate income housing, that we keep that at affordable. But if we're talking about the missing middle, then we can talk about bringing in market rate. And I think that, I do think that language matters there. Because, I mean, if we're talking about building affordable housing and we're building $250,000 houses, that might be affordable to someone, but by definition, if we're looking at HUD, we're looking at the way that most entities consider it affordable, that wouldn't be called affordable for this area.
Right, and I think it's being clear about what's that gap, right? We've got a population that earns at this income. And we've got 250 that's here, and the affordability for that 250 does not match with what our income for this community is. And how do we close that gap? And I think this gets to the question of making subsidies to close the gap or or other things. I think there's also an important element of how we have a very talented workforce in Yellow Springs, and we also need to create opportunities to be able to provide access to a labor market for a labor force so that their wages can come up to meet that standard.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So those are other ways, so it's not just in the housing. I think the tipping point or the critical mass that was just referenced, that gets at bringing on a supply online that can put downward pressure on housing prices, because we're seeing how the housing prices are moving in Yellow Springs. Some of them are high compared to new properties in the surrounding area.
Yeah, I know.
And what's driving that is a supply and demand issue. So it's not, I think conversation is more complex than, 30 minutes at a council meeting, but we certainly need to keep the conversation going.
Okay,
Okay.
any quick questions or comments? All right, good conversation. Let's go ahead and move up so we're in new business, the Cresco request. Josue, do you want to start? And Ari, thanks for being here.
Yes, sorry, I think this memo didn't get into the packet. Cresco Lab has requested a time extension for the blackout of the greenhouses from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. during the months that the days are shorter in daylight, and that's from October through February. This request has a very clear business goal for Cresco Labs, and not granting it can have a detrimental financial impact on its business. Additionally, Cresco Labs would only emit light beyond the 5 p.m. closure time to 7 p.m. when absolutely necessary due to the stage in the life cycle of the plants and when we have the shortest days of light during the year. In consideration of the aforementioned, I recommend that Cresco Labs be allowed the time extension for blackouts of the greenhouses to 7 p.m. We have 2 Cresco Labs representatives here to answer any questions and also bring the petition before council. So I'm available to speak in greater detail and ask for your input on this.
All right, you guys want to kind of explain what's going on?
A couple comments. Maxwell Salinger, I'm the Director of Cultivation, Village resident. So as these daylights start to get shorter, particularly around this month through February and March, we use a artificial blackout curtain that prevents the artificial lighting from escaping the greenhouse. And over the last couple of months, as the days are getting shorter, I've been instructed, and we have an agreement, that we will limit the amount of light that is exposed from those greenhouses. So to date, I am actually closing the blackout curtains at 5 p.m. What has been occurring is that because we are closing blackouts at 5 p.m., the plants are still transpiring and putting moisture into the air with those blackouts being closed. And we are basically building nice little clouds inside of these greenhouses. So when I'm coming in the morning, we are basically raining on top of these plants. Cannabis in particular is really susceptible to a lot of bacterial and microbial issues, pathogens. And we are tested on this by the state. And we are not allowed to sell this product when we start failing for certain levels of microbes, whether that be fungi or bacteria. And standing water on foliage, particularly, as was mentioned, after the 2nd or 3rd week of flower, where we've actually started to develop some of those flowers, becomes very, very hard to kind of make our way back from. Ohio also has some very stringent pesticide application laws. So after the 3rd week of flower, we are not allowed to apply any sterilization or pesticide agent on any of those plants. So by allowing us to leave that blackout open until the end of that photo period, the moisture is able to escape from the greenhouse and really does not become a major issue starting at about February, when sunset is around 6:30, 6:45. I can kind of time it in a way that that moisture is able to escape. But over the last 2 months, as I've continued to reduce that time, and now I'm at that 5 o'clock where I've got 2 hours, of light being on, I'm starting to deal with a lot of moisture issues, particularly in the later stage flowering. So I can commit to making sure that while I'm getting up to that second or third week of flower, I can continue to maintain that sunset timing. But after that third week, I would like to extend it, which would basically be about an hour and 45 minutes for the next month to 2 months. And then as February, those sunsets get later and later, that time pollution or light pollution becomes a little bit less imminent. I can answer any questions or concerns about that.
All right, thanks, Maxwell.
I mean, that was, I just trying to imagine what that's like to have rain happening inside.
Really, as soon as those curtains open, it pours in there. You got to remember we're a half gallon per plant, 700 gallons going into that greenhouse in the day. Plants are shooting up into the air. It's got to get trapped somewhere.
Yeah, wow. Can't have that.
No. Do we have questions?
How was it that the 5 o'clock PM was established?
And we should have you come back up
Yeah.
first.
So basically, the 5 p.m., we made an agreement that we would not pollute light post-sunset. So after sunset, the lights are going to continue to stay on till 7 p.m., but we're using the curtain to cut it out. Now, I've been consistently rolling it back because of my compliance manager that has brought concerns about seeing the greenhouse down the road, and so I consistently roll it back to match with that sunset to honor the agreement that we had with you guys when we started operating the facility.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, certainly that was a noteworthy agreement when it was established, but, like I said, in terms of having balance in the circle of life, as it were, I think it's perhaps incumbent upon us to consider giving a little bit, so that we get good, healthy plants.
Okay, other thoughts?
I agree.
So I do remember the one time that the curtain was not closed, and I was, ironically driving back from Dayton, and I thought something was on fire. I was pretty freaked out, and was glad to hear that wasn't the case. So, how do you guys have thoughts about how to educate the community about this?
I'm not sure about education, but
Or communicate?
I would really like to. A lot of the times, our hands are tied with communication and education with the public. The state sees that as advertising. So we have to get any communication like that approved by the state in advance, and it could take up to a month or 2 months.
Oh, really?
And so that is hard for us to do ourselves. I was going to say something else, and it totally slipped my mind. Normally, I'm asleep by now. I was going to say, actually, last week we did speak with Josue and with Johnny, and I know you guys spoke also with the chief of police, and you also talked to the fire department, I believe. So I think I think it was good that we went to them first before just doing something. I'm glad that I didn't actually know about the full agreement too, because I wasn't here when the site started, and I don't know who that agreement was with exactly, but we want to do as much as we can to make sure that we're good citizens in the community, and we don't want to pollute light. I live in Beaver Creek, and coming in the morning, sometimes I can see the light and from a distance, so I know it can be bothersome. So I want to make sure it was good with you guys too. But maybe through Josue, we can communicate with the village and really get that out there.
Okay, and so I'm guessing you guys want us to decide on this as soon as possible, right?
Please.
Okay, thanks, Ari.
Yep.
All right, so I guess, can we have a sort of we agreed to try it out between now and January 6th? Because one concern I have is that this was not really announced as a topic, right? I mean, the letter kind of slipped in, it wasn't on our agenda. And so, yeah, I appreciate the concern. We do want to collaborate on this, but, again, I always like these kinds of things to be on the agenda, so if somebody does want to weigh in, they have an opportunity to. So, I mean, is that something we can do?
We
say
can,
like?
we can monitor it now through January 6th for the next council meeting and have it on the council agenda formally for the January 6th meeting.
Okay.
Well, what are the impact, though, on the business and on the plants for putting it off that long?
No, we're not putting it off.
No.
We're just monitoring
Try
them.
it.
Oh, go ahead and let them have the extended time?
Right.
Right away?
And then we properly announce this, it's on the agenda. If people have comments, you know, they'll have seen it for 2 weeks.
I see.
So I have another process question. I guess so in the summer, because it's light longer, you put the, screened or whatever they're called.
Seasonal.
It's not an
You-
issue in the summer
But
because
you
the
put them
days are
over
longer.
there at a certain time because you are regulating.
Yeah, so what we do is between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. is when we have the lights on in the greenhouse. What we do change over the year is when the blackouts close. So we basically close off that light to the rest of the world. So in the summer, when the days are going past 7 p.m., no one notices that the blackout's not closed.
Right.
But Max actually manages when that blackout does close, and he can modify it from his phone right here, actually. So if you want, he can open the blackout.
I think I know where you're going with that a little bit. So in the summer, when we're pulling that blackout and the plants are kind of shutting down for the end of the day, we've already manipulated that photocycle to a strict 12-hour period. In the summertime, when that 12-hour period is up, the plants will naturally stop feeding and stop transpiring. The issue comes in when the lights are running when the blackout is actually pulled. So in the summer, we'll pull out that blackout at 7 p.m., sunset is later, the plants already know that it's nighttime and they stop that transpirational process. Right now, we're running for over 2 hours, or an hour and 45, or 2 hours when the plants are actively transpiring because those lights are actually running while that blackout curtain. So in the summer, it doesn't become an issue. The blackout has to get pulled to limit that light from other places, and from the sunset even can continue that flowering cycle.
Now, okay, this is a crazy question, I guess, but is there any way to harvest that water and then maybe recycle it? I mean, does it sort of collect on the top?
Yeah, so the system that we have, what happens is that in normal operation, when the moisture is allowed to reach to the top of the gables, it will go down the side of the gables and get collected into kind of bibs that are along those gutter sides, which we can collect that water. But when we pull out the blackout curtain, it's actually condensing on the bottom of the curtain, so there's nowhere for it to go. And that's the number one problem, is the greenhouse isn't designed in a way that the blackout curtain will allow it to drain into the bibs on the sides. It pulls and just falls down and just literally rains on top of the plants.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council?
So I think Mary Ann is offering to take a shot back.
No, I think the
smells good.
blackout. Let's redesign the blackout.
That's good water.
Yeah. Any questions or comments from citizens? Okay, all right, so here is what I'm proposing. Kind of like what I said, I do not want to I'm not comfortable making a decision tonight to say yes from now on. But I am comfortable to say, I guess, if you guys were starting tomorrow or whatever, until, we have
Monitor.
public input, we monitored it, we need to communicate it. But I guess I also feel like, even if there is a little bit of light out there from 5 to 7, except for Ari, the rest of us are going to be awake. So I mean, I don't know. I can't fully comprehend what the impact would be, but it seems like it would be pretty low impact. So we think that's something we can do?
That's doable, yes.
Okay.
I
Any other
think we should
thoughts?
do that.
Okay, so let's make a motion for a limited trial period from tomorrow, December 17th, to January 6th, when we will evaluate and make a final decision. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, thank you.
I seconded your motion, by the way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I realized it kind of rolled through that. So. All right. Okay, so Josue is going to quickly tell us about automated ticketing.
All right, thank you, Brian. This is related to parameters of automated ticketing. The most recent legislation passed by the Ohio legislature requires that revenue collected by the municipalities are debited against state reimbursements. The legislative intent is to prevent municipalities from generating net revenue through traffic camera enforcement. Traffic cameras placed in school zones may be used and revenue collected retained, but only if the funds are used to enhance school safety. One can fairly state that the Ohio legislature has taken a position against traffic cameras. 4 Ohio cities have challenged the law: Dayton, Toledo, East Cleveland, and Akron. All the cases are in active litigation. The cases will very likely be resolved by the Ohio Supreme Court. The overwhelming approach is to let the legal process play out that is currently being fought by Akron, Dayton, Toledo, and East Cleveland. In addition, a small but potentially growing group of plaintiffs, attorneys have filed suits against municipalities asserting a variety of claims on behalf of drivers cited and fined through the use of traffic cameras. For the above reasons, I recommend the village wait on the outcome of current litigation before moving forward with the installation and use of traffic cameras to traffic laws in the village. As you know, there's a much-needed activity we need to do, but we have somewhat of an uphill challenge with the current legislative climate around traffic cameras in Ohio. So I'm sorry to not have more favorable news to report on these much-needed activities on main roads in our village.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it does make sense to see how it plays out before we invest in anything. Or I don't know, maybe we could borrow them from Dayton for cheap. All right. Any questions? Nope. All right. I can do this very quickly because it's a draft. Is it possible to hook this in? And it should just say 2019 year in review. Okay, so basically similar to what we did last year, and I just wanted to pop this up there real quick to show you guys. We did this in the last meeting, and it was sort of a draft in the sense that, you know, this is our opportunity to talk or see together as council what sort of the different areas are, and then ideally get folks' feedback about things that should be highlighted in our accomplishments. 2019 year in review. Are you on the, which one did you open? Because there's like there's a boot drive, and then there's a,
This one,
yeah.
2019.
Yeah, it should be the last thing that was saved. So, and by the way, I did already remember to thank the YS News for any of the great pictures that I am using. Okay, so if we could just page down, I just want to highlight briefly. I wanted to follow the pattern from last year, so you know, we had began by emphasizing our affordability initiatives. So again, I've captured the things that I've thought of. I'm going to have Judy send this out to everyone so that you can, you know, see what's there, make any additions. Next, we go into community and economic development. Similarly, I've highlighted some of the key things that I knew about that's happened this year. There's quite a lot of them, but we can certainly make room for more. Then there's an infrastructure section. And this is actually where Johnny could also help me out a little bit. And I know that there'll be a manager's report in January. But I did want to capture some of the things that we've done. You know, for example, we've completed our storm and electric studies, and we're going to be moving forward with those. After that is our justice system, and there probably are some refinements here, but the thing I thought about the most was that we, now have a commitment to work with citizens to action some of our, did I call them solid
Yeah, that's how you call
recommendations? Yes. So I hope that captures sort of a diplomatic way of saying the ones that we think are workable. Then we've got the welcoming community section. All right. And, you may have noticed on our new sign outside, that is now our tagline, a welcoming community, which I think is great. And so some of the pictures need to be updated, like the Vita one. But there are some things I think that need to be filled in here, which I didn't have a chance to get to. And then the last one is citizen involvement. And, I think we've been thinking a lot about how we continue to develop our community conversations, but also I'm thinking a lot about how we do a better job with, the communications piece, with data, with the website, with the Facebook page, et cetera. So those are the sections. Thank you. And that was actually all new stuff, so I did have time to at least do that, but we've got plenty to be proud of. I think we should all celebrate that over the holidays. And then in the packet for January 6th, I'd like to have the complete list as far as council is concerned. So, and I'll grab some more good pictures from the YS News. So, see? Okay, so any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good job, good start.
Sure, sure. It's nice to see some positive things as we get into the holiday season. All right, so then a few other items. Josue?
Okay. All right, my manager's report. Oops. We've got a couple of project updates. You might have noticed that the new storm drains on Dayton and King Street is complete. That's the drain and the ADA ramp. So that's been completed. I've included a picture of that in the handout. The new rails on the ramp from the bike trail to the skate park is complete. I haven't seen anyone trying them out yet, whether that's holding on to them or riding them. The flower and sugar distribution, honoring the bequest of Willingham, that's complete. The remaining deliveries are with the Arts Council, and those are for select individuals. Sewer line work, you might have noticed some new crews in the area. We are doing root control on 16,000 feet of sewer lines. Work is being done by Duke Root Control. This work involves injecting a foam into the sewer lines to dissolve roots that have penetrated the sewer lines.
Where have they been doing that?
They started today on High Street, near High and North College. There's also cammering work that is taking place. This is inspection of the sewer lines to see where are challenges with the sewer lines, and whatever the most deteriorated sections of the line that we identify, those will be the first replaced, not replaced, but relined. Concrete's complete for the year. We're just doing some final touches this week and next week. Midwest is still in town changing out poles, and they'll be here until the first of the year. AT&T is changing out poles on Spillane Road next week. The water crews are working on lines located at Cemetery and Fairfield Road. We're doing some tree trimming. The Vernay cleanup, as a follow-up to the community meeting, one of the concerns that we've expressed and residents have expressed is on the safety of our water lines that run along the property. There were two particular issues that we've been working on in the last couple of weeks, and that is the exposure to utility workers in the event that a water line break occurs on the property, and our utility workers will have to dig up and repair that line. So we've received a memo from TRC, who's Vernay's environmental consultant, and this was at the request of the US EPA. In short, the memo states that the risk to the utility workers does not meet the EPA threshold. So they estimate that it would be safe for utility workers to work on those grounds for 8 hours a day for 5 days and 1 incident a year. So we looked at that. Now, we've also worked with the TRC, the environmental consultant, to put a contingency plan in place. Should a water line break occur, we will work with Vernay on an environmental equipped and trained subcontractor to come out, dig up the line, and repair it. So we've completed that task. In terms of the siphoning, the concerns with contaminants entering our water source, where there's 2 aspects of that work that we followed up on. One is having a clear plan on how we'll isolate the water lines. So we've already identified that process, where those valves are and what we would need to do in the event that a water main break occurs there. And that's to prevent siphoning effect of contaminants into our water system. And putting in the contingency in place with Vernay and the environmental consultant group, should this happen, what will be our plan of attack? So we worked through some of those details. Any questions on the Vernay? Okay, and we're working through the questions that the residents have submitted, and we'll be providing responses. We're aiming for the end of the year. Community highlights, you saw Santa out with the traditional tree lighting, so I've included that in the packet, and the photos of the projects that I've mentioned. I want to report on the utility roundup program. There was a Thirsty Thursday event last week where there were 5 new signups that took place. We also received cash donations totaling $54.59. In total, we received donations totaling $171.59. We also received money during the Giving Tuesday donation drive totaling $237.36. So that's a total of $408.95 from our recent efforts.
Cool. Yeah, it was a fun Thirsty Thursday. I didn't notice it on Facebook though. But Colleen, while you're still here, can you tell us one of those heartwarming holiday stories about utilities that you were sharing with me?
Yes, I would love to. We were pretty excited about the utility roundup, and we're always very thankful that we get that opportunity to get the donations with the brewery. And we appreciate any advertising information, since we don't have a budget that actually allows us to spend money for advertising. It's been a really good word of mouth. But when I was sharing with Brian, we do have several people that anonymously come in to the utility department and have asked to anonymously pay on a few accounts where people are struggling. And it's the same with our utility roundup, the people that are asking for donations. But we had one that paid a lady who is a single parent, 4 kids, real close to being on the shutoffs, very struggling. Her bill was over $600, and the donation was the whole amount from a lady that just walked in and wanted to help. So we get those stories, and this time of year, I just wanted to share, because we probably have had several here in the last few weeks. So thanks to the people in this community. It's very heartwarming.
Indeed. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Judy?
The only thing I've got in there is that the 2020 calendar's gone to the Yellow Springs News, so if you see anything I missed, let me know very quickly, because that's about to get splashed all over the place, and that's it.
All right. Board and commission reports. Anything anyone wants to highlight?
Yes. So I want to talk just briefly about the Miami Valley Planning and Zoning Workshop that I went to, or conference, on December 6th. It's part of the American Planning Association part of that. The keynote speaker was great, and I'm going to quote from him one sentence, two sentences. In Germany, housing is considered a right. Clearly, it's a privilege in the United States, considered a privilege. And then he also talked about sidewalks in his talk about healthy communities and the importance of having a walkable community, and highlighted situations where if it's a senior, a person with disability, whatever, and they have the kind of 6-lane roads that a lot of places have, very, very difficult to walk in. And another thing he said in talking about sidewalks is he said, you wouldn't dream of homeowners taking over the repairs of roadways. The implication was, as we do, that it's the municipalities, should be the municipality's job to maintain sidewalks, which I support that. Then a particular workshop about entitled Rethinking Planning in an Age of Acceleration. The point was made that changes are happening so fast in so many realms, whether it's technology or climate change or people moving from one job to another, that humans are not able to adjust to the rate of change. And that trying to think of spending a year or more on a big comprehensive plan, land use plan, does not make sense, because by the end of that year or 2 years, changes have happened that we wouldn't have anticipated. So the point being that it's better to sort of think maybe on a 1-year basis, think strategically doable things, and also that you have your comprehensive land use plan online, which we're doing. So basically, what I was hearing was just reinforcing things that we're already doing. And lastly, I went to a workshop sponsored by the Miami Conservancy District on water, protecting our watershed. And Sarah Hippensteel, who many people here know, was one of the presenters, and she talked about having developments, housing developments, so that they minimize water runoff, and mentioned some different aspects. And afterwards I talked to her and asked her if she would come and talk to Planning Commission or Housing Board, maybe Council. She can't do that really as part of her job because we're not in the greater Miami watershed. But she indicated that she'd be willing to do that. And then I also went to a workshop on wetlands, and they talked about how to protect wetlands and thinking about that in preparation for the Glass Farm wetland and the housing development and how we can ensure that that's protected. So it was a great conference. I also, since I'm talking right now, had at the Environmental Commission passed 2 resolutions, recommendations to council. And the recommendations in part came out of the Vernay situation. So they both deal with our source water protection plan. It appears that the Vernay plume may intersect with the northern terminus of our catchment area, the area from which our water comes. It's very, I mean, it's past the 10-year time of travel, I think. But anyway, it just looks like they overlap. But for that reason, as well as we haven't had it assessed for 20 years approximately, the Environmental Commission is recommending that the village do a new assessment of our catchment area for our water supply. And the Environmental Commission also recommends that we do a new full-blown plan for our source water protection. We did one in early 2000. It never was actually approved by council because I think it was sent to the Ohio EPA, and they okayed it, but it was never approved by council as far as I know, because I think there were conflicts involved with the group and the council Anyway, Deanna Newsome, who's been looking at our current revised plan and said, hey, you know, we haven't really done all the revision, in the conversation, and not just because of Renee, but other points of potential pollution like Morris Bean, other places, we are advising that we do a new plan. However, as Josue pointed out, we do not have money in the budget for that. So in the conversation, EC feels it's really important to do the assessment of the area and move forward on that. The plan could wait until our next budget season. And then the assessment of the area would also go into the plan. That would be part of the plan. So.
Okay.
So to add to that, would need some direction from council or approvals from council that, given that we've already approved our 2020 budget, that we would either drop something off in our 2020 budget to make an allowance for the assessment of what is our 1 year, 5 year, and the entire capture zone for our water system. They would make some allowance to cover that expense, or come back to council with an additional request to cover that additional expense.
Well, what about the commission budget?
We can look to our current funds.
I mean, is this a
Well,
really
okay.
expensive?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know how
I mean,
much.
but
I mean,
so there is a
think it-
commission budget that we approve, so.
I think it's important to find out, because, I mean, this is such a big exposure. We can't afford not to be safe.
I mean, maybe some money could be spent from the commission budget to determine how much it would cost and how we'd go about doing it. But I don't think it would be fair to take all of the environmental commission budget. It would, because it's not just about the environmental commission. I mean, we're looking at the village water supply, so.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, there was a lot left in that budget this year. So that makes me think that there's, even though we've, cut it down, that there's still money.
Well, Josue, would you be able to look into what the potential cost?
Yes,
would be?
yes, it's something that we would look to
we'll
see
have
what
to put out
consultants, right.
RFPs
And we'll also look into who did the 2001 plan, unless there's any reason why we should look for someone completely new.
There's also 15,000 from the county. So, anyway.
Oh.
And there's also lodging tax dollars, there's lots of different possibilities.
So
Okay.
I'll look at the costs and come back to the council
Okay.
with a recommendation or an action item.
All right, anything else before we talk about future agenda? All right, so, any particular topics that people want to get on for the first meeting in January?
Well, I'll come back with an updated housing goal.
Okay.
You have, complete the 2019 list of council accomplishments. You've got Cresco coming back as a full topic. I have resolution affirming the commitment to affordable housing. Is that just updated housing goals, or did you actually want a resolution?
Well, what would you suggest? If we make an amendment to that resolution, is that a new resolution, or?
That's a new resolution. I would do a new resolution. I'd just say, it's a new council, it's a,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Do we have anything from
I'll bring you
Renee?
what's
I'm
that?
sorry.
I'll
With-
bring the retreated agenda back as well, with the changes.
On the Vernay, the initial timeline for a statement of basis, which is their final EPA comments on the final remediation plan, is scheduled for January or February, but I have not received confirmation that the timeline still holds. I will have a better idea on Wednesday when we have a scheduled meeting with the EPA, and we're working through a set of task items, and I'll check in on the timeline. So we may have something to consider in January, and what that something may mean is the scheduling of the community meeting as a follow-up to that statement basis. We want to start working on that about a month ahead of the scheduled meeting to allow for the logistics and the communication.
Okay. So, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
This is the last meeting of our year.
Yes,
This year.
it is.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the last council meeting of December 2019.
Really?
Yeah.
I made that.
Okay, I heard a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Kanetta, it's been great working with you. Good luck.
Thank you.
I know we'll see you around. Thank you.
You'll be back on some commission.
Thanks.
Right.
I'll take up all 3 minutes.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Notorious.